This is not a field for people who only want to work with people who agree with them. And I worry we've got too many of those people running around right now. The values tension, I think, is always figuring out what can I get done here in a way that doesn't compromise my values, but moves the ball forward. Like if you want a place where everybody kind of agrees and pushes, like, I don't know, like maybe, I don't know, the priesthood maybe, but this isn't it.
Today's guest is Andy Rotherham, the co-founder and senior partner at Bellwether, whose work falls in the intersection of research, news media, policy, and practice. During the Clinton administration, Andy served as special assistant to the president for domestic policy. He has also served on the Virginia Board of Education and is an award-winning researcher, writer, and author. And now, here are your hosts, Mildred Otero and Taylor Stewart.
Hello, this is the Leaders Table. Welcome. We're not here to talk about titles or CVs, but to explore those moments that have shaped a leader. It's those raw, real experiences that don't always make it into the spotlight. I'm Mildred Otero, president of Lee.
And I'm Taylor Stewart, vice president of platforms at Lee. Mildred, it is so great to do this series with you.
Thank you, Taylor. It's so fun to be here. Today we sit with Andy Rotherham, the co-founder and senior partner of Bellwether, who has been on a remarkable leadership journey. Thanks for being here, Andy. We're so excited to have you.
Thanks for having me. It's great to see you both.
Absolutely. So, Andy, let's start at the beginning. Tell me about where you come from. What's the place or experience that you feel has really shaped you?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I mean, you are shaped by where you're from. So I grew up in Reston, Virginia, which for sort of urban planning nerds will ring a bell. For most people, probably not, because now it's just like a bedroom community for Washington, D.C. But back in the day, it was a planned community. It was very intentional. It was the first one. Reston actually stands for Robert E. Simon's town. He was the developer of Reston. His family had money from the sale of Carnegie Hall, and he poured that in with Gulf Oil. My parents bought their first house out there, and all their friends, I mean, I wasn't around obviously at this point, but all their friends thought they were insane to move to this plan. It was almost, it was going to be intentionally integrated and all these other things. And the idea was that it was going to be like a self-sufficient community. And as I said, it's become a more of a bedroom community, but it was a fascinating place to grow up because it was like this new experimental kind of town. It was integrated, much more integrated than most parts of Northern Virginia and most parts of Virginia at the time by design, which was really unusual. I mean, this was back in the era where like people were trying to avoid that, not seek it out. So it was a very unique place. But as I got older, you realized there was something of like an O'Malley's quality to it in the sense that like the high school where I went to on paper was absolutely integrated. It would have been a model. But if you looked at the classes and who was taking which classes, who my peers in my classes were, it was different. And that is something you'd sort of noticed as you get older. And it was formative both to me in terms of the experiences of what can be. It was very idealistic. And then also sort of bumping up against some of those elements of realism of how this stuff plays out. I don't want to tell a story like I was in high school and I was like, I'm going to become an education reformer. I thought I was going to be a resource economist, actually. But that did sort of plant the seeds for as I started to think later what I really was going to do once I was out of college and so forth. And I'd had some experience teaching. I was like, this is a problem that I want to work on because I've seen what better can look like. And the problem is better is just not equitably distributed. And that seems like a solvable problem to me. And so that's the problem I've been trying to solve, pretty much for most of my career.
Who's been the most important influence in your life, and what key lessons have they passed on to you?
I was thinking about that in advance of this. It's a number of people. I've been really lucky. And like one of the things when you move around, particularly national policy in that area, like you do bump into a lot of people who are sort of like, I got where I am, despite all the mentors who stood in my path, and that's just nonsense. Like I got where I am because I had a number of mentors. So I can think about, and I'm not trying to dodge your question, but I think about like, I was with Robin Lake. We were talking about Paul Hill, who was, hugely important. I watched he and Jane Hanaway have a conversation once, and I was like, oh, okay, that's the kind of conversation I want to be able to have. Obviously, my family, my parents, I watched how my father worked in government, a couple of different things. I watched how he sort of navigated things, and that leaves an impression. And then look, I talked about Reston a minute ago, like Bud Spillane was my high school superintendent. He signed my high school diploma. And I watched how somebody like him, Bud, he was a realist. He was a good politician. He wasn't just out there breaking China, but he was pushing for kids and what needed to happen. And when the chips were down, he would make decisions that were kids first kinds of decisions. And So I've just had a bunch of people. One of my very early experiences was a stint working on the Hill for Leon Panetta, which kind of ruins you because he was like such an incredible, is, I say was, like is an incredible public servant. And it kind of sets like a super high standard for like what you expect in terms of level of commitment, integrity, all of it. And so I feel like my story is there's not one person I can point to, one teacher, although I had some great ones, sort of a constellation of people, and you take different things and that sort of forms up who you are.
Oh, it's so great to hear all of that and to learn both a place and then some people who have really influenced you. I'd love to know, what's one surprising thing most people don't know about you?
Yeah. John Bailey said I should just do a blog post about that one time. My wife and I were very blessed. We have a very eclectic life. We used to host private concerts with really fun musicians. So all kinds of different people, Grammy nominated acts, blues, Americana, that kind of thing. I'm an EMT. I worked as an EMT during the pandemic. We are part owners and investors in a restaurant project in Boston right by Fenway, and a cocktail bar and that kind of thing. So we're very into that scene. We very into live music. I think people would be surprised, like just how much time we spend going to all kinds of shows, not just big, but little club shows, and also big shows. And then I ride my bike across Massachusetts every summer to raise money for Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And I've raised over $300,000 for that. We'll put my fundraising link in the show notes, maybe. And that's just a very important personal cause to me that I'm committed. That's about 190 miles across Massachusetts every summer. So, and then I spend a ton of time in the outdoors. So I think, and we can talk about it, I think that sort of informs, I think leaders, you have to have things outside of your main thing. I think we sort of can lionize the driven leader who that's all they do. I don't actually think, I think that makes you as effective as you can be. I think having a bunch of other things, and we can talk about that, makes you a more effective leader, is having various kinds of outside interests and other stuff you're into in a sort of broader circle of friends and acquaintances.
Kind of building on that, is there a moment or story from your life that when you look back feels like it reveals your approach, your style of leading?
I don't think there is just one. I mean, I can tell you a story from like elementary school that a couple of my friends and we decided that it was inappropriate to sing religious songs at the holidays in a public school. In fact, they were singing like different songs from different faiths. So it probably was not actually a First Amendment issue, but we were like jackass fifth graders. And so we started like reading the First Amendment instead of singing the songs, which obviously like endeared us to our classmates, did not endear us to our long-suffering teachers. My elementary school principal was just an amazing educator, and I learned a lot of stuff out of the classroom. In particular, I remember there was a food fight in the cafeteria, and afterwards he kind of dragged us down, and the cafeteria was a mess, and like we thought like, okay, he's going to make us clean it up, and he's like, I'm not going to make you guys clean it up because you do a lousy job anyway, and professionals would have to clean up after you. He goes, I just want to talk to you. He goes, there's kids in these schools, this is the best meal they get all day, and you guys are throwing it around. And that, like, obviously I'm telling the story, decades later, it's that stayed with me. I think it's experiences like that. I worked in experiential ed while I was in college and afterwards, and sort of watching people. I have a huge belief that people are generally capable of much more than they think they're capable of. And part of education is bringing that. So I think it's not one experience, but I've been so fortunate to have so many different kinds of experiences that have sort of formed up who I am, how I look at the world, and how I look at work in relation to the world, what we're supposed to be doing, and like what a North Star is actually supposed to look like.
Thank you for that, Andy. You've had such an amazing journey as a leader. And I wanted to shift a little bit around public service. Public service is a big word. What does it mean to you? And if you had a chance, what's one piece of advice that you would give to someone just starting out in this space?
I take a broad view of public service. I think public service is an orientation towards you're trying to make the world better than you found it. We could take a narrow view of that if your paycheck isn't being paid by a local, state, or federal treasury or government, that's not really public service. I don't think that's true. I think there's people working in various kinds of nonprofits and NGOs doing really important work. And I think you can have a lot of impact there. So I take a broader view of it. But I do think those formal roles are really important when you have the opportunity. They're not always easy. I actually think a problem we have in the sector is we don't have enough people who have actually been in those roles. And so appreciate, you have to balance the urgency of now with the practical realities, building consensus, all of that. But if you've been in a role where you have to do that and you have to actually cast votes, that's very important. So I'm very grateful I've had those experiences. They inform your work in powerful ways in terms of the degree of pragmatism and bringing people along and thinking in those terms. I mean, politicians, when you scratch under the rhetoric, they tend to have a pretty good sense of like, how do you have to move the public, what the public will tolerate, and a nuance around leadership. But you also need people who don't. Your whole life can't be the nuance around it. Again, you have to have North Stars. You have to drive. I mean, I'm just coming off, and so the headspace I'm in is I was on the State Board of Education for Mark Warner, which was a really great experience. I learned a lot. I went back on for Glenn Youngkin because Virginia and Arkansas were two states that did not. And in fact, like our accountability and school improvement system was so weak that we were sending money back to the federal government every year under ESSA, which, as you all know, is basically ESSA's, essentially a anything goes law. We couldn't even meet the requirements of that. And so I agreed to do it, even though I hadn't, I hadn't supported him in the election. I didn't share some of his politics, but he was committed to this. He looked at the data and he saw that, like, the story we were telling to families and parents and kids about educational achievement didn't actually match up. And he was committed to solving that. And so I look at public services, you can decide, okay, this will upset some people. It'll be awkward, whatever. I'm not going to do it. Or you can say, you know what, like, I agree with this person on this. He's trying to do the right thing. And, you can disagree on lots of other stuff, but this is a place we can actually have some common ground and try to move things forward. I worry just how hardened we've become. There isn't a Democrat or Republican way to do education, but we make it that way. And if you look historically, I mean, that's what we did on reading, and we're still trying to unwind that now with reading instruction. We do that on a number of issues, and it almost invariably rebounds against the kids who are furthest from opportunity and the kids who the ed reform movement, at least, rhetorically says they want to help. So I think the other point of public service is simply whatever kind of role you're in is being like, what is the North Star? What am I trying to drive towards? And so my advice to the second part of your question, this is a piece of advice I give to young people. Cultivate a diverse circle of friends. I really worry about the insularity. If all of your friends and colleagues and everything is wrapped up in your career, you're not going to make good decisions in high stakes situations. The overriding ideology for people can quickly become dinner partyology, which is I don't want to not be invited into rooms, spaces, experiences. I mean, that's one way to live, but you're gonna miss out on the opportunity to really try to drive impact, get things done. And so my big piece of advice is like, have hobbies outside of work, have interests outside of work. I mean, I feel very blessed. I have friends who I go do stuff with. They don't care if I'm up or down or what's, professionally or what's happening and so forth. They're interested in, we have other interests and other things. And you need to cultivate that. I think it makes you more effective as if your whole life. And it's really hard for young people to seek out those kinds of relationships, but you cannot make your life your career. You need your career, and that's important, and impact and all that is important, but you also need your life. And both of them, if you do well at them, will make you good at the other one. And if you're not paying attention to it, you won't be as good at the other one.
That's such good advice, Andy. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that as we're in the throes of something, a big project or whatever. So that's such great advice.
Yeah, it's funny. It sounds like a throwaway line. People ask me, they'll be like, oh my gosh, like you wrote this thing and everyone's angry. Like, how do you? And I'm like, well, I like to fish. I like to hike. And it's not being glib. It's like,
There's balance.
I don't totally, my life is not totally oriented around whatever the latest thing I've done is. Like, there's other ways I get pleasure, and people I derive pleasure from doing it with. And that's, and I try to tell people you can't get yourself all wrapped around the axle. It will, we're all human, and it will start to constrain you.
Absolutely. Andy, I have another question for you. Failure is a tough teacher. And we like to talk about moments that have sort of taught us something. Could you just share about a time where failure really shaped you and something that you might have not learned had that not happened?
If you want to get anything done, you need a high threshold for failure. You shouldn't be cavalier about it, but if you're not failing, you're not taking risks. And I think there's like little failures and big failures, and you learn from both of them in terms of like what's the feedback loop and so forth. My biggest pattern of failure for a while was not seeking out advice. It was like a combination of probably like arrogance and optimism, like at the same time. Like, oh, there's got to be a better way. We can figure this out. And so I disregarded advice around sort of big consequential personnel decisions. I disregarded advice, or I can't say I disregarded that. I heard it, but then I chose to do something else. And sometimes you're going to do that, but it was a pattern of no, there's got to be a different way. And I've learned throughout my career, sometimes the way things happen, sometimes there is a better way, but sometimes the way things happen is because that is actually the way. There's a gravitational force. The second thing, and I guess this would be like another just piece of advice, don't be in too much of a rush. You have to balance the urgency with like being intentional in all areas. And I think as you go through life, this changes. And I try to tell young people, like, this is the age you really want to work a lot and probably travel a lot and stuff, because you're not going to want to do that when you got a couple of kids at home or whatever. You're going to want to be able to ease up on that. But so it's not that you need, again, some urgency. That's a word I'll come back to. But you also don't be in too much of a hurry, that you don't sort of stop along the way, listen, try to be intentional. I don't think people, when you're young, you realize how fast it's all going to go and how interconnected it is. And so you want to be intentional and be careful.
That lesson about urgency feels like it's a hard fought one that must have taken some time to be able to do. So I would love to hear you talk about kind of that when you were younger, what kept you up at night early on, and now what's on your mind in those quiet moments when you're fishing.
Yeah.
And on your mind now about your own leadership and about what's going on around you.
It's probably the same thing that keeps me up. I mean, the thing that frustrates me about this issue, and to the extent I get impatient and occasionally intemperate around it, is this is a solvable problem. There are certain issues that I just think like there's things that are, inherent in human nature. There's things that are immutable facts of life and so forth. I tend to try to put my time towards what are solvable problems. I think cancer is a solvable problem. Cancer is the range of them. And I've seen so much progress just since I've been involved in that. So like, that's something I put time into because I'm like, this does not have to be this way. We can be better. And I put education in the same bucket. And so what keeps me up at night is just the extent to which it's so still adult driven, adult politics, adult aesthetics. I mean, it's easy to say like kids first. Well, that's going to be naive, and you're never going to have an entirely kids first education system if you stop and actually like unpack like what that means. But we could certainly have a system that is much more oriented towards outcomes for kids, what works for kids. I mean, again, we went through this in Virginia. So much of this stuff was just political, and it was just and you watch. I mean, you literally watch the parties change positions on things as political fashion changes, right? Or you see like cell phone bans, and a Democratic governor promotes one and Democrats like it, a Republican governor does, people don't. It's like, it's the same policy. Like, is it a good policy or not? What does that look like? And so that's what keeps me up at night. And the consequences of this, like we talk about this in our sector, I think we default too much to like earnings. We're like, if you do this, your earnings will be, it's more like, I mean, I just encourage people, I'm like, go look at the NAEP stuff online and just look at like, what does it mean to be below basic at NAEP? And like, I live in a state where like 6 in 10 Black kids are below basic at NAEP in 8th grade. And it's like, how can, that keeps me up at night because you are not going to have a life that's sort of full of choices, full of agency, if that's where you are. And again, those things that is not like an immutable condition that there's nothing we can do about. Unfortunately, I think increasingly there's people on the right and the left who, for different reasons, who do think it's an immutable condition. I don't think it is. And so that's what continues to keep me up at night, is that this is solvable. We can do better. We choose not to. And we tend to choose not to, just adult stuff. And I don't want to hang out with those people. I disagree with them on X, Y, and Z. So I can't work with them on A, B, and C. And, obviously like the current situation we're in is not making any of that any easier with everything going on. But when I think about like why we haven't gotten further, it's not because we don't have smart people, committed people, resources, like a lot of the common excuses. We're making a set of choices. And again, they ripple down. This isn't a game. They ripple down to people's lives. And I just can't I feel very blessed. I've had a life with a lot of choices. And again, I don't think that's something that has to be sort of rationed out or scarcity kind of thing. Like we can give, people access to that, and we're just choosing not to. So that kept me up at night when I was young, because I reflected on my own upbringing, where again, I lived in a community that was integrated, but you saw kids were treated differently. Who, when you goofed up, who got brought home by the cops to their parents and who got locked up. And I saw that from a young age, and it still like kind of just like stays with me that it like we can do better. And that keeps me up at night. Things that we can't change don't keep me up at night.
That is so well said, Andy. I appreciate that. In a lot of leadership development conversations, we talk about values and tension. Maybe if you could just share with us, have you ever been pulled in different directions by your own values? And how did you navigate that tension? It is something that many leaders experience in all sorts of environments. So just curious how you navigated that in your own life.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like if you do this work, there's value tensions that we talk about in this sector, like the value of like, efficiency versus community and liberty and things like that. And how do you balance those things? But I also just think you're going to have to work. This is not a field for people who only want to work with people who agree with them. And I worry we've got too many of those people running around right now. You've got to be willing to work with people that you disagree with, figure out where there is common ground, and how do you move things forward. You don't need them to see the world entirely in your view. And I really think the last decade, this sort of 100% thinking just really took off. You saw it, the teachers unions had always been sort of like that. They became really like that. The reform movement became like that. The self-appointed equity people became like that, even as what they were doing was like empirically working against what most people would define as equity. And so the values tension, I think, is always figuring out what can I get done here in a way that doesn't compromise my values, but moves the ball forward. So you're going to work with people who you disagree with on other things, and you just have to be able to be in rooms with them. And I actually kind of like that. I was in a meeting recently where somebody was complaining about the amount of disagreement at the meeting. And I was like, I think it's a great meeting. Like, I don't want to spend my days around people I just agree with. First of all, that's not going to push you. How will you even know if you're wrong? So I think it makes you better, first of all. You have to have sort of a deep commitment to liberal values. But I also just think pragmatically, you just have to be able to figure out if you work with somebody on X, even if you strenuously disagree with them on Y, if X is a good thing, did you move the ball forward? I think that's a tension. I can't tell anyone how to answer that. I can only answer it for myself, but people have to think about what's the path to being effective? What's the path to getting things done? Again, you don't have time is not unlimited. So what is the path to getting things done? You can't just wait until the world fully aligns with your values to get anything done. It doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. Or those windows in terms of a matter of governance are going to be like horribly fleeting. And so that is the big tension. And you have to ask yourself, are you going to be a tribalist or a partisan or whatever it is first? Or are you actually really focused on getting stuff done? And I think you've seen politically, I don't want to make this about politics, but you've seen politically both parties in different ways become sort of these totalizing machines where you have to be 100% in agreement. And it's served them both very poorly politically, and it's served the American people even worse. So I think that's the big tension. How comfortable I am around people who I may vehemently disagree with, but they're good on this. And I learned that from early in my career, energy costs are a big issue for schools. So I did a lot of work with energy companies around that. And these are companies in terms of extraction, environmental policy I didn't agree with. But energy for schools, that's resources, that's a whole bunch of things. And you figure out ways to work together, meet people as people and try to go from there. And but that is always going to put you have to be comfortable with those tensions. If you're not, this is not the field for you. You should, if you want a place where everybody kind of agrees and pushes, I don't know, maybe, the priesthood maybe, but this isn't it.
I think that to have somebody across from you who you disagree with, another thing that you also have to have is a learning orientation.
Yes.
So right now, I would love to hear, what are you learning right now? And whether that's about leadership yourself, what are you learning?
Be genuinely curious, right? And I think one of the things about me, I am genuinely curious about people. Large groups of people unnerve me, but individuals are fantastic. And so I like just talking to people, and it's great. And so people ask how do you have such a random, eclectic collection of friends who do all sorts of different things? It's in part because of that, because I just think everyone's got an interesting story, right? And life experiences and things they care about and know different things. What am I learning right now? So I try to every year I try to learn something. That's like a new thing. And like, so like one year was the banjo, and I will not torture you with that. It was horrible. Like I said, I'm an EMT. One year was like, I'm going to go get my EMT cards and upgrade my skills there. And I do like some remote medicine stuff. So like things like that. My wife and I like learning how to do those concerts. Like there's a whole thing when you're bringing in like the level of musician that we were bringing in. There's like a whole set of things around sound and all that we had to learn about. And again, no one learns this themselves. We get help. Actually, a good colleague of mine and friend in this field, her husband is a sound engineer, and so we learned from him. But right now, what we're learning, my kids are off in college; they're second years in college, and I'm learning about bees because we traded 2 kids for like 10,000 bees.
That sounds
in
fun.
Terms of personally, yeah. And bees are like super complicated. They're fascinating. This little society they have, all the work they do and how they interact and everything. And so my wife and I are spending a lot of time learning about bees. And I've actually had a little of our honey, which like is delicious and extra delicious. It's like a fish you caught or an animal you harvested or something. It's extra. Professionally though, which you may not have been looking for the answer on bees. I'm spending a lot of time learning about AI, which strikes me as an incredibly double-edged. I think it could be transformative in some ways in terms of the productivity. It can bring the learning. I think it's a huge double-edged sword in terms of kids and mental health and their learning and school. So like the idea of like a special ed teacher having an AI assistant to help them with paperwork and compliance, that's an incredibly exciting use case to me. Teachers generally, when they leave special ed teaching, it's not because they don't like teaching or they don't like special needs kids. It's the paperwork, it's the compliance. Like the job is rough in that way and very time consuming. And so the idea that AI could like make that a more attractive job, that's exciting to me. I also think, the experience we had with Technology 1.0 was not great, either in terms of student learning and all that, but also in terms of mental health and how people interact with each other. And so I'm spending a lot of time learning about that because I think the conversation's changed. We've got some people who, to listen to them, it's almost like they think we can put this back in the bottle, and that's not going to happen. But then we've got some people who think it's like an unbridled good, the real technologists. And I think there's some serious downsides for young people that we need to pay attention to. And then, in a society like ours, there's really complicated trade-offs there. Again, we talked about values tensions. There's super complicated trade-offs around restricting access to things. What is that? What are the trade-offs that come with that and so forth? So I'm spending a lot of time professionally learning about that. I think the policy questions are going to be really thorny and interesting, and the practice questions in education are going to be great. And then just like, lots of other stuff. And I try to read voraciously. So you always, you'll never, I hope I die with a pile of books by my side. You just never get, you never get through it. You just do the best you can.
Just quickly follow up on that. Is there anything that you have read lately that shifted your thinking or inspired you?
I'm reading Cameron Crowe's autobiography.
Oh.
I think Fast Times at Ridgemont High is one of the most important education books of like the last 50 years. It doesn't get credit. He embedded himself as a high school student. Most people know like from the Almost Famous stuff. Like he went back as a high school student, wrote a book about it. Now, look, that would certainly get you put in prison. Probably rightly so. But it was interesting. He really anticipated youth culture of the 80s. I feel like that. And then there's a book about Reston kids called A Tribe Apart. And I feel like those two books sort of capture like the 80s and what was going on with kids. I read a lot of biographies. It's like I just finished one on Sir Walter Raleigh, and we can present these people as like one-dimensional characters in these things, and he had like experiences in Ireland that sort of changed how he looked, and he dissented on some of the things that were happening around Indigenous people in the United States, or what was not yet what would become the United States. A lot of things are changing are around AI. I'm reading a lot of books around relationships around AI and technology. And those are like just, I'm not a technologist, but I'm also not a Luddite. And those are changing my views. I'm reading a lot of stuff about the moment we're in. I'm looking forward to John Rauch has a book coming out soon. I'm looking forward to. James Traub just wrote a book I've seen the galleys of that talks about what we did in Virginia on history and social science standards. And I'm reading a lot of books about citizenship, democracy. I think it's easy to understate the situation. I think it's also easy to overstate it. So I'm reading a lot of books, and I'm constantly like updating my mental map on like level of concern about what specific things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So obviously reading is going to be part of this, but walk me through your daily rhythm. Is there something that you do every day that helps you show up as your best self?
Taylor, I want that. Yeah, I'm serious. Like, that's a great question. So the blessing of my job is no 2 days are the same. I get to meet with interesting people. I do get to go places, do interesting things, see interesting things. I get to learn. I get to get out there and see things that are going on. And so no 2 days are the same. And that's great. It's also a curse because I hear my friends who talk about that ritual, the morning walk or the thing they do or, the gratitude exercise and like, and this isn't good. I hope no young person's like, listen to this. I think I wish I had like that kind of ritual every day. And so most of mine are, more stuff around making sure checking with family, stuff like that. I don't have that because every day is different. I do read a lot. I fall asleep reading and I get up, I like to have a cup of coffee and read a little bit in the morning and see what's going on. But I don't have that, and I don't think it's a good thing. I think effective leaders, you do need that, and so it's something I think about a lot. I can tell you, I'm happier when I wake up in the mountains. I spend about half my time out in the mountains, and I'm happier when I wake up out there. I like our life around DC; it's great, but I'm always just a little happier when I wake up in the mountains. And I look out and I see mountains in a valley. I tend to be able to pause just a little more.
Andy, one of the things that I think a lot of our leaders always reflect on is sort of if they could go back, what would they say to their 23-year-old self? And so, Andy, what would you say to young Andy starting out in this space?
I would tell my 23-year-old self, you don't need to be in quite so much of a hurry. I think like it's something I think about with my own kids, like 2 years to a 23-year-old is different than 2 years to a 50-year-old, right? It's just math. And time, just like the percent of your life that is, it's almost 10% when you're in your early 20s, right? There's things I didn't do, trips I didn't take, study abroad. There's things I look back, so I was like, I'm not sure I have the time for those. And so that would be like, just slow down, pause. There's a tension, like time moves fast. To name check another 80s film, Ferris Bueller taught us, life comes at you fast. And it's true, but it doesn't come at you so fast that you shouldn't be a little bit intentional. And like my wife was a Peace Corps volunteer, and I was like, I think 2 years, like that's not a ton of time in the big scheme of things, but it seems like it. So that would be my big piece of advice, would be just like slow down, think about time a little bit, just a little bit differently.
Andy, I'm curious. You've had so many amazing roles at the federal level, at the state level, local level. If you could project into the future, the education landscape in 20 years, what are you thinking about? What are the things that most do you think should be tackled?
Well, I think the big thing that should be tackled is such a great question, Mildred. The thing that should be tackled is obviously like allocating education by zip code, by family income, by race, by ethnicity. These are choices. And again, it's a cliche, but it's not pie. There's only so many ways to cut a pie if everybody's going to get a slice. This isn't pie. It's actually good for us. Like so much of our future competitive talent is locked up in places that we underserve. And so that talent, it never realizes what it's capable of. So it's in everybody's interest to do this. So that's the urgency. What do I think is going to happen? I don't know, obviously. I mean, it's tough to make predictions about the future, right? We do have good models, and I'm optimistic. We shouldn't, but we've given up trying to bring these schools in communities. Now we're giving people the opportunity to exit and choose schools in different ways. And I think that's going to have a positive effect in terms of people being able to access options that work more for them. The system has proven itself to be incredibly unresponsive, fights back against efforts to make it more transparent and responsive. And I think, Americans are understandably like, okay, no, particularly Americans who have been chronically ill-served and for whom the stakes are higher. But what does that mean in terms of the level of variance? And are we going to just tolerate even greater variance? And right now we seem to be on a path there. So you'll see some really amazing stuff, and the overall average level may move up, but we're still going to tolerate a lot of variance. And then second, just as a human level, what are our relationships going to be like? So something I'm very interested in right now is the Vatican. The last two popes have had very interesting things to say about AI and our relationships and what are we meant to be? How are we meant to be with each other in relationship, in communities and so forth? And it's kind of crazy if you step back that this, 2,000-year-old institution but like they actually have some interesting things to say that I think people should pay attention to. I worry we've customized and personalized. Everybody gets their own news, their own information. You see this, and again, we've grafted it on that like misinformation is a right-wing problem or a left-wing problem rather than it's an American problem. It shows up everywhere in different ways. what is that going to mean in terms of education? What's the role of education in terms of teaching us to live in community, live in a pluralistic way? Like, you don't suddenly become a professional in education and learn to work with people you disagree with. Like, I feel lucky that like I grew up in a time and a place where there was just people broadly around who were different and thought in different ways, and that was like normal. We need to make sure the way we're increasingly doing education, doing housing, even now starting to do healthcare, certainly recreation, people are like seceding out, and schools are going to have to, what's the role in teaching us to live in a way that we're like sort of just deeply tolerant of people who aren't necessarily like us, but are here and are part of the American life, the American creed. And I think that's, whether or not we get that right, I think is in 20, 25 years, do we look like a country like Venezuela where, people live in gated places behind walls and there's not much of a middle class and there's very low trust? Or do we come out of this and into a more sort of prosperous place? And again, like I said, I don't know. I can paint a picture either way, but I think the unbundling of public education that's happening now, different is not always better. And I think there's just a lot of work to do there and a lot of thinking to do around that. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Thank you, Andy. That honesty and openness of sharing your story means so much. I'm sure it will resonate deeply with our listeners and with everyone who's tuning in today.
Absolutely. It's conversations like these that remind us what leadership is: complex, imperfect, and deeply human. To everyone tuning in, thank you for spending this time with us. Remember, leadership is as much about the questions as the answers. Take care until next time.
Thank you for listening to The Leaders Table. Please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts, and for more information about Lee, you can visit us online at wearelee.org.